So, as usual, the class is being recorded. Again, this is Dr. Samih Abdul Jalil, and this is book 2, and we're doing poetry this time around. Interesting, because poetry is very interesting. So, as you can see, can you feel the diversity and the variety that we're introducing you to? I mean, you have different genres, you have different areas of knowledge, if you like. We started off with history when we spoke about Cleopatra, and then we moved on to painting when we took Cézanne. And then after that, we did philosophy, and this time around, we're doing poetry. So a wide variety of genres and ideas, and this is actually what makes this course very rich and very invigorating, if you like. Okay, so like I said, we're doing poetry this time around, and poetry. I'm not going to make claims. I'm not going to kind of prejudge or give you perhaps my experience with poetry. Let's see what poetry means to every and each one of you. So when I say poetry, what comes to your mind, everyone?
Rhymed words, maybe?
Yeah, come to the mic, raise your voice, and then you are on your way. So this is Dania, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe rhymed words with
Mm.
a sense of meaning behind them. Only
Mhm.
like people with like artistic or imaginable minds could actually see what the author or the writer means behind the poetry itself. Because each poetry has a story behind it.
Okay, interesting. Can we have somebody else? So what are the associations of poetry? What comes to your mind when I say poetry? Hello? So do we have, I mean, poetic talents in class? Do we have people who sometimes write poetry? Like we did, I mean, remember when we spoke about Cézanne and painting, we spoke to some students, and we have discovered that they are artistic in the sense that they paint and draw themselves. So do we have people who also um, are talented? Perhaps the medium this time around would be different. It's going to be the word. So do we have poets in class? You don't have to be a great poet, by the way. You don't have to be a published poet. I mean, just if you catch yourself from time to time scribbling things on a page and you think this is poetry, just go ahead and share that with us. We're over 30.
I do.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Dania, remember last time you said that you do painting, right?
Yeah, well, I'm interested in all kinds of arts.
MashaAllah, yani multi-talented. Good, that's good.
Thank you.
Okay, exactly like me. I don't paint or. Okay,
That's right.
interesting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Yeah, I once tried to like it was for a school for like I
Yes.
had to do it. It was a project, but I don't really remember how I how I did it.
Yeah, but the fact that you reacted to it, saying yes, I'm ready to do it, means that you have potential. Until that moment, it was what we call untapped potential. Potential means that you have it inside you, but you didn't have the opportunity to perhaps give voice to it. So when they asked, you reacted in a positive way by producing one. So you need to check that, yeah, Pascal. I'm sure if you work on it, you have the potential, I think. So it was this one lifetime experience. You never did it after that?
Yes, I only made it for the project. I tried
Mm.
my best and it was fun.
Okay, so let's talk the impressions of people when the teacher read it. Did she or he like it?
Yes, actually, she liked it, but like I wish I remembered anything from it. It was like
Yeah,
three
it was
years ago.
way back when you were a small kid, perhaps, right? Okay,
Yeah, almost like grade 10 or something.
okay. So anybody else? The gentleman, we have more than one person. We have, I think, Mahmoud. We also have Sattam. Sattam, are you artistic at all? Do we have Sattam today? Obviously no.
Yes, sir.
Are you asleep or something?
No, reconfigure my microphone.
I was. Are you still kind of adjusting the settings? Can we ask?
Yes, by all means.
Yeah, I was talking about you. Mashallah, your language is very powerful, and I think it applies to Arabic too. But I'm saying I was wondering if you're talented when it comes to perhaps writing poetry. Are you talented at all? Do you write
I don't think
sometimes?
I can say if I'm talented. I
Every
do
every one
appreciate
of us
poetry.
is
Arabic.
talented in an aspect, in one way or another. But I'm focusing on verbal expression. So do
Yes,
you? There is obviously something wrong with the.
yeah,
Yeah, if you can, raise your voice a little bit.
um, I do believe that I'm is somewhat competent in linguistic endeavors.
Hmm,
Uh, I do appreciate poetry, whether Arabic or English.
interesting. But you don't try it yourself. You never try to write poems.
Uh, I have tried Arabic poems.
Nice.
I'm still working on it. I haven't finished any of them.
Is it an epic or something? Something that takes hundreds and perhaps thousands of lines?
No, no, no.
Uh,
It is epic compared to my talent. It's just a few lines.
yeah. Because you're saying it's yeah, man. I got the feeling that it's a long project, and whenever we talk about poetry and long projects, we talk about something that can take perhaps hundreds of lines and stuff. Um,
Yes,
okay,
very true.
that's interesting. Thank you, Satam. Anybody else before we perhaps move on? No, no poetic talents in class. I'm sure you guys have talents, poetic talents, but perhaps you're shy or something. Okay, that's interesting.
Hi, doctor.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Uh, I'm Inas Mohammed. Actually, I tried before to write some poet,
Mm.
but my family didn't allow me to write it because it's not in our family tradition.
To write poetry. Poetry
Yeah,
is something. Yeah, it's
I
something
don't know
interesting.
why they didn't allow me to write it, but
Uh,
I love to read the poet in Arabic,
yeah, you
like
appreciate
Nazar
poetry. You read
Qamani or
poetry
something
and you
like this.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
How about the idea, Ines? How
yeah.
about the idea of reciting poetry? Because reciting poetry is also a talent. Do you recite? Do you know how to recite poetry? الإلقاء.
What do you mean by recite, Dr. Saleh?
إلقاء
Uh,
الpoems.
no, I didn't have this talent. No, no. I just
But it's only
love to read
you
or
write.
and write it.
You sometimes you write,
Yeah.
and you also appreciate poetry. You know when there is a good
That's before,
poem.
not now. No, now I'm very busy.
Yes, I know. Okay, thank you, Ines. So people don't have to be poetic in the sense of producing and writing poetry. They can also they can have the ability to appreciate poetry, to tell whenever there is a good poem, right? And when we talk about poetry, poetry is across cultures. It's a cross-cultural, um, genre. We have poetry in Arabic and, of course, in English and in all the other languages. Okay. Again, if we talk about poetry, and if you compare poetry, we've been dealing with texts for quite some time. We have done philosophical texts. We have done texts on Cézanne, and we have done historical texts. How different is poetry or the poem from the other texts in terms of, I'm talking about the graphical um, angle. I mean, I'm talking about what you see on the page. How different is a poem from a non-poem or from a non-poetic text on the page? Any? Okay, let
Yeah.
me perhaps make it closer to you by what we wrote or what we read quite recently with Plato, for example. Was it poetry that we were reading?
No.
No, it wasn't.
No, it was
So,
dialogues.
yes. So it's either, I mean, in life, whenever people express things verbally, they either write in poetry or in what would be the opposite of poetry? Yes, I'm sure it's coming. So you either write poetry or prose. Excellent. Prose, prose, right? So what do I do now? Do I speak in poetry or in prose?
Prose now.
Absolutely prose. This is
Yeah.
prose. Okay.
Never.
Yeah, when you communicate with me, when you communicate with your family and loved ones, when you communicate with your boss at work, you communicate using poetry or prose?
Prose.
Prose. Yeah, good. Okay.
Poetry, it's for a romantic moment, maybe, or
Romantic.
roman. roman.
Romantic.
Yes.
Nice.
Or
Okay.
maybe when you with your love, you can use both, or when you
Yes.
when
Yani,
you're with
Mahmoud, there
one.
is obviously more to poetry than just
Yeah, it's
romance and
for
stuff.
some moments, not all.
Okay, good. So, so which of them is perhaps special, prose or poetry?
Both.
Poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, um, poetry is a special way of expressing something, right?
Right.
Okay.
Because not all of the people can do broad.
Okay.
Some of people who is had in the top of people who can do this
Okay. Thank you,
to
Mahmoud.
make it a special, because it's difficult, the sea of port, and you will be on the same uh, road or something like this.
Okay, Mahmoud. Thank you so much. ما شاء الله متغدي النهارده الظاهر ف you're full of ideas. Okay,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much, Victor.
Thank you,
But
Mahmoud.
I'm a little.
Alf salam. Would you
I'm
like to leave?
no. I'm very interesting with you.
Okay, thank you. Uh, okay, so again, poetry is a special way of writing. It's also a special way of communicating ideas and feelings. Okay, if you're going to write me something, you're going to write in paragraphs, right? Where normally paragraphs are you know, you take the it's what I call a margin to margin way of writing. With poetry, you don't have this margin to margin way of writing. You normally have the poem in the middle. You don't reach the margin, right?
It's in the middle.
Okay. خلينا محمود عشان بس يعني it can be a little bit interruptive. But let
Okay.
me finish my line of thought, and
Okay. So,
I can always ask you, inshallah. Okay, so again, I'm making this distinction between poetry and prose, and I am saying that prose is general. It's something that we do on an hourly I mean, when we speak, whatever we say is prose, but poetry is obviously different. It's a special way of communicating needs and feelings and ideas and all these kinds. So in terms of the page that um, we're using in order to perhaps write something. If you're going to write a poem, it is normally different from writing a paragraph. With paragraphs, you have those margin to margin lines. In poetry, I mean, the line of poetry, however long it is short. If you compare it to the line in a paragraph, it would be way shorter. Okay. So somebody was talking about, I think it was Dania, spoke about the idea that with poetry you have rhyme. Rhyme means that, like songs, when what is interesting about songs would be the fact that you are, in most of the cases, able to memorize the song. Why would you memorize the song? Because of the rhyme that it has. Rhyming means that um, the final sounds of the of a word in a line. The final, you normally have perhaps two lines, and under each other, and they end in the same sound. So this is called rhyme. Um, and this is called rhymed lines. Rhymed lines, of course, are easy to memorize, and that would explain why people can memorize a poem or a part of a poem or a song, because songs are, for the most part, poetic, where you have rhyme. You don't only have rhyme; you also have rhythm. Um, if you if we talk about poems, in terms of where they are on the page, so poems, when we talk about poems, we talk about them horizontally and vertically. If you talk about them vertically, so we're talking about rhyme, the end of the lines, and whether the sounds, the last sounds or the final sounds rhyme together or not. This is called rhyme. And if you're moving horizontally on the level of the line itself, from left to right, from the first perhaps word to the last word on the line, so this is called rhythm or meter. And it's the idea of having those stresses. I mean, I'm sure you have done that even in your EL 120 classes, where you have syllables. The words are divided into syllables, and sometimes you have to raise your voice at one point, and then you kind of lower your voice so that you can have those stressed and unstressed syllables. So rhythm is also part of the poetic experience. So what gives music to the poem or the song would be the rhyme and also the rhythm. This is, of course, together with the the beauty of the imagery within the poem itself. What else? So, of course, if you have a poem, you need to have a poet. The creator of a poem is called a poet, right? And the whole experience, the experience or the skill or the talent of writing a poem is called poetry. And poetry, of course, is a literary genre. So if we say that a short story is a genre and a novel is a genre, we also say that poetry is a genre. Okay, again, it needs talent. You need to be talented in order to produce poetry. Okay, so you need to be talented to produce poetry, and you need to be perhaps develop the skill of appreciating poetry. So appreciating poetry can be, something, you can be talented in appreciating poetry. It can be something that you're gifted with, but you can work on your appreciation skills. And this would bring me to the question of which of them, if I ask you, writing poetry on the one hand and appreciating poetry, which of them is acquired and which of them is in Paul, the words is a talent and which of them is a skill?
Of course, like writing poetry is a talent.
Excellent.
And like, for example, reading or reciting poems, that's like a skill.
Yeah, it's a skill that you can develop, right? Okay. So I don't decide tomorrow to go and study or to get training so that I can become a poet, right? It's the difference between being and becoming. So with poetry, with writing poetry, I would use being a poet, right? With appreciating poetry, with reciting poetry and reading it, I would use becoming perhaps a critic or somebody who appreciates poetry. So becoming is about developing something, which is something which is acquired. Acquired means that you work for it in order to earn it. Okay, being means that you're born with something. Okay. Okay, so let's go to the slides and see what we have. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the chapter that we're having. This is, of course, from book 2. Remember, it was tradition and descent. So reading poetry this time around. And in order to read the poems that we have this time around, we're going to use the Faber Book of Beasts. So this is an anthology, and I'll talk about anthologies and what they mean in a minute, okay? So we have a book of poetry called the Faber Book of Beasts. So what is it that we're going to do with that? We're going to take poems from it and analyze and shed light on. Okay, let's talk about the table of contents for the chapter. So we're going to start with an introduction about, how different this chapter is. It's also about tradition. We're going to check whether it's also moral traditions like we have seen in Plato, or is it a different type of tradition. Obviously, it is, because we're talking about poetic traditions, artistic traditions. Okay, so it's going to be also artistic or poetic traditions, and there is going to be an element of descent to it. Of course, we spoke about descent. Descent means that you don't follow the guidelines and the rules. We have seen that with Cézanne, we have seen that with Plato, right? And we're going to see that with the poets that we're featuring in the chapter. So we'll talk about that more. And then after that, we will have three poems. Three poems by three different poets, and those three different poets belong to three different ages. We have William Blake, the Romantic or the pre-Romantic, the English pre-Romantic poet, and his poem is The Fly. We have John Donne, another English poet, but he belongs to a different age, and his poem is The Flea. And we have Miroslav Holub, and he also wrote a poem by that has the title The Fly, and that we're featuring in the anthology, and we're going to also talk about it. So what do they have in common? Let me ask you. Look at the poems. What do the poems have in common? I'm asking you.
Yeah, they all
William
talk
Blake's.
about it.
They are all about what?
Animals. Animals.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
About insects.
Yeah. About insects. Of course, you know the difference between a fly and a flea, right? If you don't, perhaps I'll give you a minute to kind of go to and Google the word flea. Go to images and type flea and see what will come out. But take care. Huh?
A fly, it's, can I say it in Arabic?
Yes.
ذبابة.
Yes.
And a flea, it's برغوث.
Yes, absolutely, yes. There is a very nice, is it a song? I don't know. It's very funny. It's called Azubaba. Yeah, check it up later. Anyway.
Yeah.
So these are poems, and we'll get to know more about poems and the things that we have been talking about. When we're done with that, we'll talk about using anthologies. And like I said, the Faber Book of Beasts is an anthology in and of itself. And then we're going to end the chapter with a reference to D.H. Lawrence. And D.H. Lawrence is a very famous British poet and also a novelist. So again, this, as you can see, the chapter promises to be a very interesting one. If you're into poetry, you're going to enjoy it like you can never imagine. So let's go. Let's before we start, let's try to unpack these words. And obviously, these are technical words. Yes. Go ahead.
Sound is not clear.
Wallah. Let me. Can you hear me now?
Sound is not clear.
Hello?
Yes, it's clear, Doctor.
Yes, it's clear.
No,
Okay.
it's clear.
I think
Perhaps it's because of this, the mic that I'm using. Sometimes, I get carried away and then I leave the mic and go back. And you need to alert me whenever you don't feel, comfortable with the sound. You can always alert me. Anyway, like I said, these are technical words that we're going to use while navigating through the chapter. I'm sure you're familiar with most of them, but we're going to go through them. let's unpack them, because obviously some of them are concepts, and there is obviously a difference between you know a word and a concept. A word, you can find a synonym for a word, but for concepts, concepts or would require you to explain something. You would engage in defining. Okay, so when I say a poem, for example, if I check the dictionary, I'm not going to find an exact word for the word poem. I'm going to find a definition, right? When I say poet, I'm going to I'm not going to find a synonym. A synonym is a word that has the exact same meaning. I wouldn't find that, right? But if I say beast, I don't need to define a beast. A beast would have a synonym. A beast is animal. Can you see the difference? When I say, for example, imitation, I don't have to define imitation. I can simply say copying or mimicking. Are you getting the idea?
Yeah.
Okay, so some words are concepts that you have to perhaps engage in defining, while some other words can simply have a synonym, a word. So the word poem is, if I check the dictionary up, I wouldn't find a single word for it. We'll have to define it. And like we said, a poem is it's a form of poetic. If I say poetic, it comes from poem, so I'm not defining. So it's a form of expression, an elevated form of expression that would be different from the from prose, in terms of of the rhyme that it has, the rhythm that it has, in terms of its existence on the page, the fact that its lines are way shorter than the lines of a prose piece, right? So like I said, if you have a poem, you need to have a poet. A poet is someone who writes poetry, who writes poems. And then you have poetry. Poetry would be the experience of writing poems, the experience of being a poet. And like we said, poetry is a literary genre. Okay, genres are literary types. Okay, you have short stories, you have novels, you have drama and plays. These are all genres, and poetry happens to also be a genre. And then you have rhyme. A rhyme is again exclusive to poetry and poems. You don't have rhyme in prose, for example. And rhyme is about having those similar sounds at the end of a line of poetry, for example. You normally have last different lines, and they can be two coming after each other. They can be three, and we're going to see how this plays out in a minute in a poem. And then you have rhyme scheme. Rhyme scheme means the plan that the poet has when it comes to rhyming. Is he going to have, he or she, of course, is he going to have two two lines rhyming together after each other, or three lines rhyming together? Every and each poet has a scheme or a plan, okay, depending on how he wants to communicate I mean, the feelings and the experiences, and even the ideas that he has.
There
Again,
usually,
yes,
yeah. Can I talk?
yeah, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. There isn't the rhyme scheme represented by letters, like for example AA, BBCC. We used to take.
Yeah, this is, of course, not what the poet, does. This is you as a reader, or as
Yeah.
perhaps a critic. Okay, you. This is the theory part. You are trying to make a theory out of it. You say, for example, whenever we have two lines rhyming together, I'm going to call it a couplet, for example. And
Yes.
the first two, so it's going to be perhaps, if I'm going to start with A, and the second line rhymes the same, it's going to be another A. And then if I move to the third line and I have a different sound, it's going to be B. The fourth line, if it agrees with the third, it's going to another B, and so on and so forth. Are you getting the idea?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have rhythm, and like we said, when we talk about rhythm, we talk about meter, we talk about the tempo, or we talk about the beat. Poetry is very similar to songs, right? What sometimes appeals to you in songs is the beat. Bum, 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 bum. Sometimes you feel it if you have musical ears. Sometimes you just enjoy the music in general. If you have musical ears, you know when there is the stress, the bum, where the bum is, bum, bum, bum.
The beat.
Okay, the beat. I'm not artistic, so I don't know much about that. Perhaps if we have somebody who sings, he or she would tell us about that. Okay, so like I said, meter is also the calculation of the beats and the stresses and the unstresses. And then we have, excuse me, and then we have the word stanza. If in prose we write in paragraphs, right? But in poetry we write in stanzas. Okay, so a poem can have a number of stanzas. If I mean every three or four, or perhaps two lines that are written together, and then you have another four, a third four, or a fourth four. This is called a stanza. And then you have the word couplet, and couplet is from the word couple, and you're familiar with couplet means two lines. And then you have the word triplet, which means three lines. And then you have the word image. Image is perhaps taken from the world of painting, right? So image, you have images, but they are, instead of having a paintbrush to draw the image with, you have the words, right? Are you getting the idea? So uh, poetry is about creating verbal images, صور لفظية if you like. Okay, and then we move to the word anthology. And anthology is a collection of poems. I mean, it doesn't have to be poems. Anthology can also apply to the other genres. You can have an anthology of short stories. You can have an anthology of plays. You can have an anthology of poems. Anthologies are poems by a collection of poems by different poets. You don't have one single poet in anthology. Okay. So if you have, so who's going to, if they belong to different people, to different poets, so obviously you have somebody who would collect them together in this anthology. And this is what we call the anthologist. Anthologist is somebody who makes anthologies. What does he or she do? He collects poems by different poets and put them in the collection that we call anthology. Okay, so how does he do that? We'll talk about that in a minute. I mean, in terms of the selection, why would he choose this poem to include in the anthology and not the other one? This is something that we're going to address perhaps in 10 minutes or so. And then you have the word beast. And like I said, beast is another word for animal. Okay, so if I have an anthology of um, animal poems, so the poems are going to be all about animals, right? And this is actually what we have. The anthology that we're dealing with is an anthology of beasts or animals. Okay, and then we have imitation. And imitation is copying. And imitation is one way of perhaps writing poetry, writing also, you know, artistic and literary prose. Sometimes people would judge how good you are based on how much of an imitator and copier you are. So at one point in the history of English literature, being a good imitator was what counts. If you want to pass off as a good imitator, as a good poet, for example, you would imitate classical models. We have taken that. Remember the tension or the conflict between traditionalists and moderns when we spoke about Cézanne? Still remember that? I'm asking you, was Cézanne a copier and an imitator?
No, he wasn't.
Excellent. Okay.
No.
That's why he wasn't accepted in the salon at the beginning, remember?
Yes, he made a revolutionary art.
Excellent. So. Yeah. This is imitation. So sometimes you also have poets who imitate. And obviously, there is nothing wrong with imitating a style at the beginning. If you are in your formative years, if you're still learning, so you don't have a voice and a tone of your own yet, right? So that's why you find yourself imitating other people. Then obviously, there is nothing wrong with that until you get a handle on um, on the material, on your talent, and then you should be on your way. You can use, traditional models and traditional forms, but you have to have your own tone, and you have to have your own voice and even your own ideas. And this is actually what the chapter is about. The chapter is about um, tradition and following tradition, and whether following tradition in poetry is good or bad. So we're not talking about moral tradition like we did with Plato. We're talking about poetic tradition. And the question would be about how much should we imitate and follow, poetic traditions, and how much we should have our own unique and independent voice and tone. This is going to be the tension that we're going to have. Okay, so if you move down, you have connotations and associations. And we use them interchangeably, by the way. Connotations and associations are the ideas that a word may trigger at the back of your mind. Okay. And there is obviously, perhaps it would be, clearer if I compare it or set it against the word denotation. So you have denotation, which is the opposite of connotation. Denotation is limited. Denotation is the literal meaning of a word. Okay, while connotations and associations are the shades of meaning, the concepts and the ideas that the word triggers, that the word that pop out once I mention a word. Like, let me give you an example. When I say, for example, let's say Saudi Arabia. Obviously, you're not going to find a denotation for Saudi Arabia, right? Denotation means that you go to the dictionary and look the word up. So obviously you don't have, because this is a proper noun, right? Okay. But you can have associations and connotations for Saudi Arabia. Connotations and associations are the ideas and the meanings that the phrase Saudi Arabia triggers at your mind. So what does Saudi Arabia trigger at the back of? What are the associations? A country, a big country in the Middle East, right? One of the biggest countries in the Gulf area, right? Nice people. I've been with them for quite some time, and I'm so happy. I have friends and everything. Okay, so my associations are going to be different from yours. My connotations, because they are based on my experiences, right? Right. Let's talk about, when I say, what can we have a denotation for university? Yeah, I think we can.
Yes.
And we can also have associations and connotations. What are the connotations and associations of university?
It's about our experiences.
Okay. What else?
Learning.
Learning. Yeah. Learning,
Lectures.
education.
Lectures.
Yeah. Classes,
Education.
lectures, yes, teachers, right?
Educations.
Yeah, education, high level of education, and nice. Okay, let's go a little bit literary. When I say red, the color red, can we have a denotation for red?
Blood.
Not that I know of. No. If you're saying blood, this is a connotation. Yeah, whoever is saying blood. So what are the connotations of red? Blood. What else?
Tomato.
You're hungry, I think. Yeah.
I think apple.
Flower.
Apple.
Yeah, let's talk about the the sensations and the feelings that a word may trigger.
Love.
Love, right?
Dangers.
Danger, blood, wars,
Vibrant color.
Romantic.
romantic. Yes, nice, interesting. When I say white,
Fire.
yeah.
Decent.
When I say white,
Peace.
Life
Peace.
color.
peace, excellent. So these are associations and connotations, right? Peace, innocence, purity. صح?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Right. Let's move down. We have the word romantic and romanticism. And by romantic here, I don't mean, I mean, two people falling in love with each other. No, I'm not. This is called romance. And this is not what I mean. Actually, the word romantic is the adjective of the trend, okay, that we call romanticism. This is a poetic trend that started in the late 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. We'll take that perhaps in A to 30, inshallah. It's called the Romantic School of Poetry, where we have poets like Wordsworth, Shelley, Lord Byron, if you're into poetry. So those names may ring a bell at the back of your minds. If not, that's fine. Okay. So the reason why I'm mentioning romanticism and romantic poetry, because one of the poets that we're featuring is a romantic poet. I'm talking about William Blake, as you're going to see in a minute. Okay. And then we move to personification. And if you unpack the word, so it comes from person, an individual, me, you, and everybody else, right? So person, so, and then you have personify is to make a person. How do we make persons? No, we don't make persons. To make a person here means to give the features and the attributes of a person. So we're going to tweak it a little bit, and we're going to say that person means human. Okay? So, but we don't have humanication. No, we don't have humanication, but we have personification. Okay? So person here means human. So personify means that you give human attributes. You give human features. You give it to whom? You give it to animals. You give it to inanimate objects. You give it perhaps, remember Asil Hillani when he was talking to the door? فاكرين الأغنية دي؟
Yes.
Still remember?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is, yes. معرفش كان, it was a nice, at the time it was a nice song. So this is called personification. So where you give, if you talk to the door, you're assuming that the door has ears, right? And the door can hear you and can even react. He also gave the door human attributes. The door, I think, shed tears, right? It was tearing. Am I remembering correct?
Yeah. عمرك شفت شباب عم يبكوا.
قوليها بس كده لو سمحت. Can you say it?
Yeah, it's عمرك شفت شباب عم يبكوا.
Yes, yeah. Very interesting. Okay. Again, you have personification, and you have a similar thing. This applies, of course, to poetry and to literature. And you have what we call it's very mouthful, and sometimes
Anthropomorphism.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is exactly like personification, but on a large scale. If you see what I mean, on a large scale means that in a poem you may have a line giving this kind of personification, but sometimes you have whole stories where animals are given human attributes. If you're familiar with, what's the name of this guy, this novelist? Are you familiar with Animal Farm? This is a very famous novel. Animal farm is about a number or a group of animals, and they talk like us, they think like us, they make groups like us, like I said, they think and feel, and okay, that this is anthropomorphism. And again,
Doctor,
I'm sure, I mean, it's all over the place. I mean, look at the cartoons, for example, that we see.
Doctor,
Yes.
like the Lion King,
Yeah, excellent, excellent. What's your name?
Nurhan.
Nurhan. Excellent, yeah, Nurhan. Okay. And the reason why we're featuring it, because we have it. And then you have the word simile. Simile is when you compare also two things using the word like or as. Okay, are we clear on that?
Yes.
Let's move.
Yes,
Clear.
it's a clear.
Yes, yes, it's clear.
Let's talk about the aims of the. I don't have a watch. You need to kind of alert me. So what time is it?
Is it 5 exactly?
Okay.
So
Five
Okay.
o'clock.
Okay. So what are some of the aims? So again, it's poetry that we're having, and it's obviously a new genre. It's something that we haven't taken before. That's why we're going to kind of learn how to read a poem, how to appreciate a poem, and when we talk about poetry and understanding poetry and appreciating poetry, we don't just focus on the message or the messages that the poet is trying to deliver or get across to us. There is more to a poem than just the messages that the writer is giving. So people normally, which is obviously a bad, if you ask me, it's a bad practice. They focus on understanding the meaning of the poem, and that would be it. They don't look at the formal aspects. Okay, when you approach a poem, it's two things that you should do. You have the formal approach, where you focus on the form. You focus on the form means that you go and check the rhyme scheme, go check the meter and the rhythm, look at the imagery within the poem. Okay, and you try to link that to the message or the ideas that the poet is trying to kind of communicate to us as readers. And the success, a measure of success as far as poets are concerned, would be the how the poet is using those formal aspects in order to deliver or to give the messages that he has. So what is unique about poetry and poems is not the message or not the ideas. It's the form of the poem. Why? Let me perhaps make it closer to you. Let's talk about war. War, you can write a book, you can write a prose book, you can write a novel on wars, right? On a war. You can write a short story on a war, on war. You can write a play on war. You can also write a poem in war or on war. So obviously, when it comes to ideas, you can use any genre, right? So what makes poetry different from short stories would be the idea or the form. What do you think?
The form.
It's the form, right? Because ideas can be expressed in any genre. Okay, so to lose sight of the existence of form, whether you're doing that intentionally or not, this is perhaps besides the point. Perhaps you sometimes people are not trained to check and address the formal aspect of poems. That's why they focus on the content. They focus on the messages and the ideas that the poem is communicating. Again, this is good and well and everything, but obviously this is half the battle. You still have the formal aspects of the poem. Okay, so this is actually what we're doing. So the idea of critically reading a poem, looking at its formal aspects and how those formal intrinsic aspects, communicate or help communicate the ideas that the poet has in mind. Again, we're going to talk about tradition and descent, but this time around we'll talk about tradition and descent in poetry or in literature. Poetry has its own set of tradition, like anything else in life. So if you follow them, so you'd be a traditional poet. If you don't follow them, you would be perhaps an innovative and a modern poet. But there is an area where tradition and innovation meet when it comes to poetry. The idea that a poet starts off a traditionalist. He has to copy the forms and the techniques of old traditional poets until he or she develops his own voice and his own set of techniques. Okay, so it's not about kind of challenging tradition all through. No, there is a time where you as a poet have to kind of copy and imitate. And obviously there is nothing wrong with that unless it stays with you and you become a mere copier or a mere imitator of ancient models and old traditional models. Okay. So tradition and descent in poetry. Typically, we've been talking about tradition and descent for quite some time in the first book and in the second book. This idea of tradition and descent started with us with, if you still remember, with Marlowe. And if you still remember, he, through, for example, Dr. Faustus, he communicated ideas that would challenge, and dissent from existing orthodoxies and tradition. Remember, religious and social and even political. And then when we spoke about Cézanne, we said that he was not a traditionalist, and he would not follow the traditional guidelines of the salon. That's why he got rejected a number of times. This is again dissent. And then we moved on to philosophy, and we spoke about Plato, and of course what Plato said about moral tradition, the fact that he wouldn't accept them unless they go through the mind, right? This time around we're having challenges to tradition, but the tradition that we're having this time around is not moral or artistic. They are poetic tradition. Okay. So this chapter focuses on poetry where concepts such as tradition and descent have different connotations, have different meanings, as you can see. Again, you're going to discover over time when we read the chapter that new poems are having this kind of conversation with older poems. As a poet, you're not totally divorced from the poetic tradition of your culture, for example. So at one point you have to use them. You have to have the new poems that you're creating. You have to have this kind of dialogue or this kind of conversation with old or older poems, and this is of course called imitation. And I said there is obviously nothing wrong with imitating, and it always starts like this. People, I mean, young souls like us or like you, if you're a budding poet, you imitate forms, because you're not going to come up with your own form. If people are using the sonnet in English literature, we have a poetic form called the sonnet, where you have 14 lines. Obviously, you're not going, your ideas and your imagery may be your own, may be original, but the form is traditional. So you're not going to, as a young poet, you're not going to invent your own forms. Yeah, perhaps when you become older and more established and everything, you can tweak certain forms, but not in your formative years as a poet. If you're young, if you don't have the experience and everything, it's exactly like in music and in singing, for example. I'm sure you're familiar with, um, singers when they first start. How did we know about George Wassouf, for example? Are you familiar with George Wassouf? How did he start? If you still remember, he started
He imitated
by
also.
imitating and by singing songs by older singers, right? And then over time, he developed his own voice and his own tone, and he started to have his own songs. ولا إيه؟ Hello.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing in poetry. If you're a poet, whenever you start, you try to copy and imitate older people and existing forms. So when you develop your own tools, your own poetic tools, you start to write in your own way, to give your own ideas, use your own techniques, right? Okay. Again, we're stressing the fact that at one point as a poet you have to have your own voice. We're going to do that with people like D.H. Lawrence. D.H. Lawrence is a famous poet and a novelist. He got influenced by older poets like William Blake and Walt Whitman. But over time, he's going to deviate from them. He's not. He's going to be perhaps using their forms, but the ideas are his. Sometimes he tweaks and adjusts the form so that they can serve his own purposes. Okay. Am I making sense so far?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
doctor.
Doctor.
Nice. So again, we're stressing the fact that you shouldn't be all the time repeating or recycling traditional forms and formulas. At one point, you need to decide to have your own voice and your own tone, and you have to innovate and come up with fresh techniques and fresh ideas. You always have to have this tension in you between the old and the new. And actually, it's this tension and conflict between the old and the new that perhaps stimulates you to come up with ideas and to experiment with this form and this or that technique and so on. We have a very interesting quotation in this regard. We have a poet by the name of Louis MacNeice or MacNeice, and this guy is Irish, and Louis MacNeice, and he spoke about this idea of tradition and innovation, and he said, and I am quoting him, a poem to be recognizable must be traditional. Okay, but to be worth recognizing, it must be something new. Can you see this? You have two things. In order for people to accept you, you need to use a recognizable form, which is obviously old or traditional. So you use the sonnet, for example. The sonnet is traditional. You put your ideas in the sonnet, which is traditional. So people are going to say, this is a sonnet. So you got recognized. Okay, but for people to go and read your poem, it has to have something new. So they can recognize the form. Yeah, this guy is writing a sonnet. Okay, but whether we're going to go and read it depends on the fresh and the new ideas that you're presenting. Are you getting the idea?
Yes.
Okay. So as you can see, it is true that poetry has this element of tradition to it, yet poetry cannot survive through traditional forms and motifs only. No, there is obviously more to poetry than just tradition. And then we come to the idea of poetry as an intellectual activity, whether on the level of the poet or the reader. Intellectual, it means that poetry, you wouldn't deal with poetry the way you deal with a newspaper article, for example, or a casual piece of writing. Poetry is about intensification, whether of ideas or idiom. By idiom here I mean words. So whatever other people say and give in hundreds of pages, a poet say in a few lines. So imagine the intensification and the condensation that the poet does in order to not to write pages upon pages upon pages. Are you getting the idea? So the idea of intensity is not without its own challenges. But if poetry is intense, it means that it does not lend itself to easy reading and easy interpretation. That's why sometimes not two people agree on the meaning of one single poem. I mean, you can have so many different interpretations because people read the poem, they bring to the poem their experiences and their backgrounds and everything. So poetry is intellectual. It's of all the other literary forms, it is the most intellectual. And if it's intellectual, it needs you to kind of be on the intellectual alert about things. You don't just read it, like I said, a casual type of reading. No. Okay. So the book of poetry that we're using is called the Faber Book of Beasts. So Faber is obviously a publishing house. It's a respected and a famous one. Okay, so it's the Book of Beasts as published by the Faber publishing house. So a book of beasts. We spoke about beasts, and we said that beasts means animals, which means that we are in for a book that features animals. Okay, so when you read the introduction, or perhaps on the cover page, you're going to know that this is a poetic anthology. And we said an anthology is a collection of poems by different poets. And if you have different poets, you have to have an editor, the one who selected the poems. So as a publishing house, I would commission or ask somebody to come over and collect a number of poems or short stories so that I can, as a publishing house, I can sell, right? So do we have a criteria for choosing the editor, the one who's going to collect? Of course. He has to be, perhaps if it's a collection of poems, if it's an anthology of poems, he should be a poet himself, perhaps, or a critic, right? Somebody in the field. Okay. So would that be enough? We're going to see that that wouldn't be enough, because obviously my choices are going to be different from yours, from different from the editor, right? So if I like a poem and the poem is not included in the anthology, I'm going to accuse the editor perhaps of being biased. If let's say you as a young lady have your own favorites, okay, but you don't see your favorites in the anthology, you would simply say, why not? Why didn't he? Perhaps this guy is sexist. Sexist means that he has prejudice against women. He's a misogynist. Are you familiar with misogynist?
Yes.
Misogynist is a woman hater. Why didn't he include my favorite woman poet, Sylvia Plath, for example? Why didn't he include this or that poet? So this is the problem with anthologies, that not two people agree on the list of poems presented. If you are chosen to be an editor, you're going to come up with your own list. Okay? So using the Faber Book of Beasts, so as you can see, it's a book of beasts, which means that the book has poems that are on and about animals. Okay, so we consider anthologies and the role they play in the understanding of poetic traditions. So what is an anthology? Like we said, the word means a collection of the flowers of verse. By the way, we use the word verse and poetry interchangeably. They mean the same thing. Okay, so why am I saying flowers of poetry or prose? Because poems are exactly like flowers. They smell good, they sound good, right? They have their own unique way of giving expression to our feelings and ideas, right? Okay, so like I said, if you look now, go ahead. Yes. Okay. So anthology means a collection of the flowers of verse, and it is taken from the ancient Greek practice of collecting favorite poems. Again, the idea of collecting poems, collecting songs, you yourself do it. I'm sure you do it. I mean, you have your collection of songs, right? You make a list of them, a playlist from them, and every time you are perhaps free, you go and play the playlist, right? It's the same thing. Everyone has his own anthologies, whether we're talking about singing or talking about poetry, or any other, anything for that matter. So this is a human practice or a human habit or impulse, the idea of gathering favorites, whether it's a book or whether it would take the form of a book or a computer file or a computer folder for that matter. But there is obviously a difference between personal selections and personal favorites and things that I would publish in a book and then perhaps sell. Which of them is more perhaps professional? Which of them is perhaps more reader-oriented? My own choices and my own favorites as an individual, or anthologies that are perhaps produced by publishers and commissioned to professional individuals or poets. Okay, there are significant differences between a personal selection and a collection such as the Faber Book of Beasts. Obviously, a published book is a more powerful document than a private collection because of its outreach. If a book is sold, it's going to kind of cover perhaps a huge area, a wide range of people, while your own collection is exclusive to yourself, perhaps. Again, if they commission a poet, if a publisher commissions a poet or asks a poet to collect, to build an anthology, I mean, it's something that does not happen overnight. The anthologist would take time to go through the books, the different books, and look at this poem and that one, and check why he would include this poem and not that one, right? He has to have his own calculations. He has to even move on eggshells in choosing a certain poet and not another poet, because at the end he's not going to satisfy the needs of everyone. Every and each one of us has his own, unique taste. Whatever I like does not necessarily appeal to other people. Everyone has his own taste. This is the challenge. And of course, you have lots of other, considerations that he has to think of. The idea of gender, for example. Am I going to include, women or not women? And if the poems that I'm going to choose are all by men, would women get angry and upset? If I choose all the poems to be by women, would men get upset? Okay. If I choose poetry that belongs to the modern age, would people who like, traditional poetry be angry? If I choose traditional poetry, would modern people be angry because they like to see their modern ideas presented in the new poems? So it's a lot, as you can see, it's a lot of calculations. Okay. So anthologies, like we said, construct readers' understanding of poetic traditions through the act of selection. So through the act of selection, the anthologist defines and delimits the scope of a tradition, which means that anthologies are implicitly provocative. Provocative means that they make you ask questions, like I said. It provokes you to ask why. Why did he choose this? Why not that? Why did he choose this lady and not that one? Why is it all men that he is taking poetry from, or the other way around? So if my anthology of the world's best poems excludes or dismisses the work of your favorite poet, you will feel sad or upset by my choices, and you will argue that my anthology isn't quite what it should be. Okay. And then you have the idea of how did or how does the editor choose? What are his criteria, his selection criteria? Is it age? Is it gender? Is it culture? For example, he would include, poetry or poems from Europe, not from the Middle East, not from India. Why? Men, not women. Why? The Middle Ages, not the perhaps the modern times. Okay, so lots of questions, as you can see. So who is the editor of the Faber Book of Beasts? It's Paul Meldon, and Paul Meldon is a distinguished poet himself, and he is the winner of different literary prizes. So he's a considerable poet himself. So that's very important, because even though he is one of the best poets, people are going to accuse him of perhaps being biased and being having his own prejudices and stuff. So he himself is a poet with previous experience of producing, and he has done other anthologies. Again, as you can see, he has credibility. You can trust him because of his long experience building anthologies, and because he himself is a poet and he has his poetic taste. So again, if you compare him to you and your favorites, of course your choices are casual, are not studied, right? Again, it's not only about the editor and also the publisher. Like I said, the publisher is a very famous publishing company by the name of Faber and Faber, and it has published for other distinguished poets like T.S. Eliot and Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes and W.H. Auden and Seamus Heaney and others. Okay. Meldon reflects on the idea of anthologies in the introduction to the anthology. He said, he made it explicitly clear that obviously his choices may not coincide with the choices of others, might not be consistent with the choices of others. And he said that we as anthologists are arrogant, are very proud, and even despotic. Despotic means that we are dictatorial in our choices. We don't allow other people to interfere in our choices. And even when people ask us about them, we perhaps get nervous and get upset. And we show signs of arrogance, like he says. And he understands. He says that when we build our own anthologies, we give the impression that we know everything, which is obviously shouldn't be the case. We don't humble down. Again, you would respect the fact that he is self-confessed, that he is a self-confessed arrogant editor, the fact that he confesses and acknowledges the fact that as an editor, he can be despotic and dictatorial in his choices and decisions. And this is something, like I said, that you would respect him for. Again, he says, we don't have the luxury of including all that we love and all that other people love. We are limited by space. We're given a certain space. So if I would entertain your choices and your taste and other people's choices and taste, obviously the book or the anthology is going to be so big, and this is something that I don't have control over, because when they assign me to come up with the anthology, the publisher gives me a specific space to work within. Again, what is perhaps interesting about this anthology that we're having is that it's not organized or arranged in a historical or in a chronological way. If you talk about logic and you have an anthology, and this anthology has different ages, you normally start with the old and then you move to the new. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Right? Is he doing that? No, he's not doing that. He's moving alphabetically. So he starts with A's and he finishes all the A's and moves to the B's. And when they asked him why, perhaps they're not asking, he's telling us this in the introduction. Why would you do that? Why don't you start historically? You start with the old and then you move to the new in a chronological way. He would say that I don't want people to be under the impression that whatever I present first would be the best. If I start with whatever is old, people would understand that I am favoring whatever is old and I'm giving judgments. I'm starting with them because I like them or because they have their own artistic value. No, this is not what I have in mind. So in order to avoid that, I'm going to use alphabetical orders. It's exactly like what? I'm sure you see, TV serials, for example, Serial and Egyptian. And sometimes you have so many movie stars or stars in the movie. And of course, everyone wants his or her name to appear first. Sometimes a good solution would be that, your name is your destiny. If your name starts with A, for example, you're going to be number one. If it's Z, for example, you're going to be the last one. Are you getting the idea?
Yes.
Okay. So this is exactly what he did. He said, if I start historically in a chronological way, people may take it that I'm favoring the old schools of poetry over the new ones. And if I start with the new ones, people would say that you are biased against the old school of poetry and you are all for new poetry. He said, I'm going to use the alphabetical order, in order to not to give the people the feeling that this is hierarchical in the sense that I'm sticking labels and I'm assigning value to whatever is old and so on. And he said that this way, the idea of alphabetical order is also interesting because, we're putting poems that, belong to different ages together so that we can juxtapose them, we can set them against each other and come up with conclusions about their value and their merits. So the alphabetical structure does not allow the reader to read only older or only more modern poems. Rather, it shuffles them together and refuses to privilege distinctions between ancient and modern, between past and present. We read poems from different traditions written in different styles. Again, what was his purpose? He said that I wanted to present a selection of the best animal poems in the English-speaking tradition. Does he live up to that? No. When you check the anthology, you're going to have translated works, translated poems from other cultures. Again, he's stressing the fact that his selections are guided by a non-hierarchical, inclusive outlook, which wants to extend the awareness of the reader and make him or her aware of a range of traditional, of the traditions of animal poetry. Again, the anthology also is also built on a conventional genre, a medieval one, where you have those collections of poems that would address and talk about animals. This is medieval. It has always been there. Again, what is interesting about this medieval genre would be the idea that they have this moralizing element and moralizing commentaries to them, together with illustrations and everything. Again, as a poet and an editor that lives in the 21st century, who knows that directness, moralizing is not acceptable. People don't like to have other people preaching them, asking them to do this and that. He is, perhaps this is the thing that he didn't take from the old medieval form. So he makes no attempt to provide a unified moral commentary, because this would be too direct and very straightforward, and this is not modern. Okay, clear enough? Hello?
Yes.
What time is it?
It's 5:42.
5:40, huh?
Yes.
Okay. So we're like I said, the anthology. From the anthology, we'll have three poems, and these are animal poems like we agreed, because the anthology is an anthology of beasts. So it's The Fly by William Blake, it's The Flea by John Donne, and it's The Fly again by Mersolov Holub. I would like you to look at the first two poems. Look at the dates. Look at when they were written. Which of them is older, The Fly or The Flea?
The flea.
The Flea, right?
The flea.
19
Yes, the flea. It's older.
it's by John Donne, 1572. Okay, and why would you're going to see that we're going to start with The Fly? Isn't that strange? The Fly
No.
is
The fly starts.
newer, right?
The fly starts with B.
I'm talking about William Blake's poem, and I'm saying that this is perhaps The Flea is older than it, but we're starting with William Blake's The Fly.
Because it's read by Blake.
Perhaps this is not the reason. Perhaps you need to go back to the introduction in which he said that I'm not going to start in a historical or in a chronological way. I'm not going to start with the old and then move to the new. Remember?
Yeah, he said I will start.
Yes.
Yes, but that's why he is starting with William Blake's poem. Okay, so that's why and this is, like I said, this is the alphabetical organization that he promised us. This is the poem, and it's a poem. Graphically, when you look at it from afar, you can almost tell that it's a poem, right? Why? Because it has its presentation on the page is very unique. You don't have this margin to margin line. Do we have that? No, we don't, right? So the lines are short, as you can see. You don't can you see paragraphs?
No.
No. Lines.
So can you see those? I mean, you have groups of lines, right?
Yes.
Every
Yes.
four
Small
lines, or every four lines is a group in and of itself, right?
Yes.
So instead of calling those different groups paragraphs, we're going to call them stanzas, right?
Right.
So how many stanza can you see?
5.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 5 stanzas. Excellent. Okay.
5.
Good. Allah Akbar. طيب. If you're writing a paragraph, would you accept that sometimes you have a line that is long and sometimes you have a line that is short? Is it acceptable in prose? If you're writing an essay and you have a paragraph? No, this is not acceptable in prose. But it is acceptable here because this is poetry, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Doctor,
Yes.
not all of this it's inside our book. I just have a 3. The last
You
one.
have it, Mahmoud. I mean, you have it. You can Google it and it will appear to you.
Okay.
But we don't have a problem with the poems. The poems are all over the place. Okay.
Okay, doctor.
Okay. So again, back to the poem. If you still remember, if we say that it is a poem, we'll have to deal with it horizontally and vertically. Horizontally means, the line itself in a horizontal way. So what do you look for horizontally? You look for the rhythm, the beat. Okay. Um, what do you look for vertically?
Right.
Yeah, you look for the rhyme. Excellent. You look for the rhyme. Okay, good. Um, two approaches we said when it comes to reading a poem. Of course, you need to read the poem out loud. This is perhaps part of the beauty of the poem, to read it out loud. You shouldn't be reading a poem silently, no, because like I said, how could you appreciate and feel the music, whether it's rhyme or rhythm, unless you read it out loud? So make no mistake about it. Poetry that is not read out loud is no poetry, right? Okay. So what I would like you to read the poem. I would like you to read it on your own. Perhaps your mics are muted, but that's why when you read it for the first time, I would like you to read it out loud to yourself. Okay, so mute the mic and I'll give you 2 minutes to read the poem. Remember, reading a poem is different from reading prose. You don't say no. This is not poetry. Take your time. Try to observe the beat, if any. Try to also observe the rhyme so that you can feel the music. If you feel the music, so the poet is doing a good job. If not, so something is wrong. It's either you or the poet. Okay? Can we do that?
Yes.
Okay. Yalla. Mute your mic, read it out loud, and then come back to me.
Okay, doctor.
Okay.
Okay. One word is missing. Can you guess
Well,
the missing word?
I will try.
Or if? Okay. If I live, or if I?
Die.
Actually, two words. Die, right?
Yeah.
And simply because of the rhyme, right? Fly and die.
Yeah. It's on the same.
Yes, it's the same rhyme. Yes. So did you read it?
Yes.
Did you feel the music?
I try to do this.
Yeah, it would take time. Perhaps it
Yeah.
takes
No, I
training.
finished. I do it. Oh, I
Mm,
also do it.
good.
Yeah.
Anybody
You
else?
you
Let's
feel
talk
like
about
you do a
your
song.
impressions now that you have read it out loud. Hello,
Yeah, I did,
everyone.
but my voice is ugly.
Your what?
My voice is ugly.
No, it's not about. Yeah, no, I don't ask you to sing it for yourself. We're not going to record your voice. No, it's not about that. It's about انت عارفة الدندنة when somebody يعني دندن بحاجة and of course if you like it, if you feel that it is يعني dandenable if you like تستاهل يعني, right? Did you feel,
Right.
and this is my question is, did you feel that? Did you feel the music?
I
Yeah,
feel.
of
Yeah,
course.
it's nice.
Oh,
Because it's rhyme.
yeah, but
I
yeah,
feel.
sometimes it's rhymed, but it's يعني دمها تقيل. It's not يعني, right?
مش ولا بد.
Yeah.
So give me your feelings about it. How did you find it? How was it?
Not bad.
Interesting, bad?
Not
It's
bad.
okay.
I think not bad.
Okay. طيب. So can we read it one more time? And this time around, we're going to read it for the meaning. Okay?
Okay.
I'll give you another 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if you take your time, if you're slow, because this is again poetry, and poetry is not easy to read. It's very intellectual.
I guess it's about memory or something like this.
Okay, something like this. Yes. Okay. Who else?
Can I explain the first two stanzas?
Only the first two?
Like those are the ones I can explain like clearly.
Okay. Okay.
So little fly, thy summers play, my thoughtless hand is wished away. So he's talking that he brushed the fly off his hand.
Hmm.
I'm not I fly like this. So he's not a fly and she's not a man. That's what I got from
Yeah.
this part.
Again, so you'll have to read the poem as a whole. You need to kind of link the words on the page to your knowledge. You need to kind of think of a context where the ideas would fit, and you need to also know that poets are like philosophers. They have those nuggets of knowledge, nuggets of wisdom to what they are saying. So you don't deal with them the way you deal with prose writers who just write anything.
Can I
Okay.
try to say what I got from the
Yes,
poem?
yes.
I think the main meaning behind it is the idea of life. Like
Okay.
a fly was like, let's say, happy flying in the field, and so
Okay.
was he, like if he's in a party dancing, doing whatever, but
Mhm.
then reality hits him when
Yes.
it brushes his wing, or when he like
Excellent.
blindly pushes away the fly.
Yes.
So
That's an excellent interpretation. Let me warn you against something. something that lots of people do. Don't you ever read critical material or secondary sources on, especially on poetry, before you read the poems themselves? If you do that, you're going to spoil the whole experience, and you will never learn to read poetry in a critical way. Are you getting my point?
Kind of, but like, what do you mean second?
Okay. So what is secondary sources and what is primary sources?
Yeah.
A poem is let's say, for example, we're going to end in 5 minutes, and I ask you to write an essay on this poem, what you understood. Okay? So the poem itself is called primary source. Okay?
Yeah.
And the essay that you're going to write, of course, on or about this poem is called secondary, is going to be secondary source.
Because it explained the primary source.
Yeah, it explains, because when you write your essay, you're going to also depend on secondary source. You're going to read essays, you're going to go to the internet and check what
Doctor,
other
is that
people.
in the final?
نعم.
Is that in the final exam, or
هو ايه ده؟
the essay? Is it in the final exam?
It's not about that, Satam. You're missing the point.
No, I'm just asking in general. Is there an essay in the final exam?
Inshallah.
Okay.
I promise you.
Allah.
Oh no.
Allah.
I promise you.
Doctor.
You're getting used to multiple choice questions, or
Yeah, it's very fantastic.
No.
الاسم مرة طول يا دكتور.
Doctor.
Well, we'll have to do it, يا جماعة. We're English major, and we should be able to write essays, and
صح بس
we should be even trained. I mean, the idea of having so many multiple choice exams is not to my taste or liking, because it doesn't teach a lot. But anyway, don't worry, and let's just focus on خدتنا بس يا سلطان بعيد عن what we're talking about. Can I finish my line of thought and then?
Okay. But just I want to tell you about what William Blake meaning on this.
Let me finish this idea of primary source and secondary source first. Okay?
Sir, that wasn't me that was talking. You said Sattam.
That was me, Hamza.
Yes.
في حاجة يا جماعة؟ نروح الاسم. Okay. So again, you're familiar with the TMAs. Have you done TMAs before?
Yeah.
Your EL1s, you guys are not. You have done perhaps before this course EL117, and you have done GRs. And GR is about, sometimes you write a piece of research, right?
Research, yes.
Okay. So you write a piece of research on something, right?
Right.
This something that you write on or about is the primary source. And then you go to the internet or you go to the library and you start reading articles or reading other books. So the books that you read, the articles that you read are called secondary sources.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
Yes. Again, I would like to thank Dania for her very excellent interpretation. And I'm saying never try to read a secondary source before you have read the primary source.
Okay.
Never read, articles or explanation of a poem before you have yourself read the poem and understood it. And then after that, you go and read the critical material, perhaps for research purposes. Is that clear?
Yes. I actually didn't read anything like this. Is
Yeah,
like
no, I'm not saying that you have. No, I'll just I
Okay.
wanted to say that your interpretation is very original, is very good, and
Thank
that's why
you.
I'm saying that everybody should be doing the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Doctor.
Now,
Yeah, just I want to explain what William Blake means on his the poem.
okay, go ahead.
William Blake compares his life and death to that of a fly which he happens to kill.
You're reading from something, Mahmoud, or
No, I write it because
but obviously you're under the influence of something that you have seen or read, right? This is not you.
yeah, no,
This is not original, right?
No, it's original. I wrote it in my book because
I know, but you
to
have read,
not forget.
you have read something from outside about the poem, right?
Yeah, I search it because I don't know what he meaning.
But this is what I am warning people from. You
Okay.
need to try first to read it
Okay,
on your
because I
own.
don't know what he meaning. Then I go and search.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not. I mean, it would be fine if you're looking up individual words, the meaning of, but not the paraphrase or the explanation of the poem.
Okay.
If you're saying that he is comparing this and this is not you, right?
Yeah.
This is somebody else.
Right.
Obviously, there is nothing wrong with quoting other people, but again, this would be the second step, not the first step, ya Mahmoud. Are you
I
getting?
already do the first step because I don't know what he meaning. I can't understand what he meaning on his
Okay,
poem.
I'll tell you. Yeah, that's okay because this is poetry, ya Mahmoud, and it takes time. No problem.
Okay.
No worries. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
طيب. Okay, so what I want you to do for next time, I would like you to read the poem one more time on your own and try to kind of scribble down and jot down whatever ideas and impressions that you have. And then you go and compare whatever findings you came out with reading the poem yourself with critical material. Yani, I would like you to read the poem as a primary source, and then after you have done that and after you have perhaps written some notes, I would like you to go to the secondary sources. Check the internet for the meaning of the poem.
To compare between of your words and the right meaning. May I right?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. What time is it? Is it 6
No,
already?
six
Five.
It's six.
طيب. Okay. طيب, we're going to stop with this item and on this note. Do you guys have any questions before we leave?
Thank you so much. It's an interesting class
Thank you.
today.
Thank you,
Okay.
doctor.
You're welcome.
Thank you, doctor.
You're welcome, يا جماعة. السلام عليكم. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Salam.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.